because those people's gods were just as real to them as yours is to you. And even if their gods drove them to murder thousands of people, they saw that as right, and people willingly died and gave their own lives for their gods. What you perceive as God is totally individual, so how can you say that God exists for an atheist when in actuality it doesn't?
Reality is something that we construct in our mind. Gentlemen, is a bad dream I'm having right now. In other words, God's existence does not depend upon my perspective, and his existence does not depend upon my perspective either.
Cliff gets pressed by these atheists, so make sure to watch till the end because I have a Bible verse that will tie all of this together. Shout out to Cliff and give me an answer. You can check them out in the description below. Anyway, guys, let's get right into it.
You said that God exists in a dimension outside of time, and he can see what we're going to choose through free will ahead of time, even though it is our free will to choose it. My question for you today is, if Jesus was God, how could he have a moment of doubt if he had the ability to see beyond time?
Great question. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus says, "No one knows the day or hour of my return, not the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." Paul writes about this mystery of the self-limiting of God when he becomes man. In Philippians chapter 2, he writes, "Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking on the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men." See, the claim of Jesus is to be God, limiting himself and becoming a finite human being. And his knowledge was limited, and he talks about that very clearly in Matthew 24. "Not even I can tell you the day that I will return." So when you're dealing with Jesus, you're dealing with God who limits himself, takes upon himself a torso, a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, and limits his knowledge even as he becomes a human being.
If he became a human being and we're by nature imperfect, how is he a human being without sin?
Great question. Adam and Eve, by nature, were not imperfect. And Jesus has an advantage over me in that Jesus was born in a supernatural way and started like Adam and Eve did, without what Dallas Willard, the fine USC professor, calls the readiness to sin factor. So Jesus began life like Adam and Eve did. That's part of why the Bible talks about the virgin birth. But he still was tempted. And Matthew chapter 4 graphically pictures that temptation at the hands of Satan.
Yeah, that's interesting because I never thought about it like that. Disobey God. I think we all choose freely to disobey God in a sense, but he literally took on flesh so that he could walk among us and go through what every human being has gone through so that we could be saved. And also he could say, like, I've gone through this. I've experienced the worst possible death imaginable. Okay, the Romans crucifixion was the worst excruciating pain, agony that anyone could go through.
Sacrifice is different from suicide. Is me determining to end my life. That is different from me saying, this guy is in trouble. He's about to get hit by a car. I'm going to push him out of the way, but when I push him out of the way, I will get run over by the car. I value his life so much that I push him out of the way, sacrificing my life in the process. That is a statement of my understanding of his value and my love for him and my willingness to put his life before my own. That is a big difference from me going into my dorm room and jumping from the balcony because I want to end my life. Big difference. Jesus did not commit suicide on the cross. Jesus sacrificed his life on the cross for you and for me. Big difference between sin and sacrifice. Yes, sir.
A few minutes ago you said that the fact that an atheist does not believe in God does not change the fact that God exists. Correct?
Exactly.
But a point I would bring up is that God exists to you because the way you perceive reality is that you believe in him. An atheist is an atheist because the way he perceives reality, God does not exist. So for each individual person, their own reality of what they perceive around them is what is for them. So for you to say that God exists, even if an atheist thinks he doesn't, is purely your viewpoint, not his, and not his reality. On that same token, saying that God, as your concept of him, is real, and saying that, say, the Aztec gods were not real because they sacrificed thousands of people to them, is a total fallacy. Because those people's gods were just as real to them as yours is to you. And even if their gods drove them to murder thousands of people, they saw that as right, and people willingly died and gave their own lives for their gods. So what you perceive as God is totally individual. So how can you say that God exists for an atheist when in actuality it doesn't?
Great question. If I believe that this man is a bad dream that I'm having right now, does that change the fact that he's sitting here?
Well, I don't think you can cross-reference someone who's obviously there to something you believe, which you've never actually perceived.
No. You're making a fundamental statement about reality. What I heard you say was, reality is something that we construct in our mind. So if in my mind I construct, this gentleman is a bad dream I'm having right now, does that change the fact that he's sitting here?
Well, obviously not.
All right, then please be very cautious when you think. Reality is simply something I create in my mind. I don't agree with that.
Why?
Because I think that I can misconstrue reality. I think I can make mistakes. And if I think he's just a bad dream I'm having, I am sadly mistaken. Or if I think the earth is flat and not round, I am sadly mistaken. Or if I think that up is down or down is up, I'm sadly mistaken.
Right, but it's still all perception, because the atheist is still going to perceive that God is not there, even if you think he is. So how does that prove your point by making that example?
Well, let's say that the doctor tells me that I have cancer, and I look back the doctor in the face and say, no, that's your perception. I know that I don't have cancer. That doesn't change the fact that in reality I do have cancer. Similarly, just because I say God exists doesn't mean God exists. Just because I say God doesn't exist doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. In other words, God's existence does not depend upon my perspective, and his existence does not depend upon my perspective either. He exists separate from my perspective, and if God exists separate from my perspective. Which means the challenge for me is to find out, is he really sitting there or not? Similarly, the challenge for me is to figure out, does God really exist or does God not exist?
Yeah, that's good. And when people do evil things, it's like saying, no, for them it's not evil. For them, it's just what they thought was good. But if there's a moral value, you have to admit that there is inherently some things that are very evil and very destructive and no one should ever do. That means there has to be a moral law. That means that there actually has to be absolute bad things.
Right?
Right, but why have you figured out that he exists?
Okay, good. I'm standing here saying the reason that I believe God exists is because the evidence of the order and the design of the cosmos clearly points to some type of intelligent mind. The evidence that life comes from life does not come from non-life, points to a living, intelligent mind existing. The evidence of moral absolutes convinces me that there's some type of creator who created and defined justice, love, compassion. There's more to reality than matter and energy.
Yeah, but your perception that life comes from not life, see...
No, life comes from life.
I'm sorry, well, correct. Your perception is that life comes from life and life does not come from not life. But that is based on your belief that God created the first life.
No, it's not based on that.
Well,
it has nothing to do with that. My belief that life comes from life has to do with figuring out where little babies come from.
Nothing comes from nothing, guys. And we see that over and over. You can't create nothing from nothing. Everything is created by something.
Out where little rabbits come from. Figuring out how to get a baby colt if you want a baby colt. You bring a male and a female horse together. You don't bring two rocks together and get a baby horse out of that. My experience in this life is life comes from life. You never get a baby human being coming from non-life. Life comes from life. Plant life comes from plant life. It doesn't come from inanimate matter. Therefore, is it more plausible for me to believe in the beginning God, or is it more reasonable to believe in the beginning, hydrogen. Because my experience tells me life comes from life, it's more reasonable, it's more plausible for me to believe in the beginning God, not in the beginning hydrogen. You follow that?
Well, I follow that, but I disagree with your example for the reason that several scientists conducted an experiment where inorganic matter in compounds, I don't remember the exact ones because I'm not an expert on it, were taken, and under pressure and heat and what have you, those compounds did form what would be the building blocks of life. And this happened very shortly. So non-life created life to begin with.
Oh, no. Oh, no, no. What happened was intelligent mind took some matter and energy and put it together in such a way that life comes about. Very good. That's exactly what I believe. Intelligent mind, God, brought about life.
Yeah, but that argument's the same as God existing, not existing, because that's what you believe and I believe the other.
No.
No. He's saying that there was people who put this science experiment into a lab in order for it to happen. What you believe is that this happened on its own and nothing made this happen.
You don't have life coming about by chance.
Why?
Because your example was some scientists in Chicago set up a situation in which they produced something that we think might have been life, and it's not clear at all either. That's a very questionable experiment. Highly questionable. Even if they pulled it off, the point is, intelligent mind organizes chemicals in such a way that life comes about. Yeah, that's what I believe. Intelligent mind, God, organizes things in such a way that life comes about. All I'm saying is take 10 pennies, number them 1 to 10, drop them in your right pocket, pull them out sequentially. I'm not going to stand around holding my breath waiting for you to do it. You're asking me to believe something even more incredible. You're asking me to believe that by chance, by accident, the human eye, central nervous system came together. I can't swallow that. Is that more reasonable? Or is it more reasonable to believe behind order and design, there's got to be an intelligent mind? Gosh, isn't it incredible the way the bricks fell together there? It's amazing. And the way the wood just fell into place, and the little glass up there in those windows. Man, I mean, it just came together. Rubbish. Order and design clearly point me to a builder, an architect, not an explosion in a brickyard. Man, let's go to Mount Rushmore. Oh, yes. Man, isn't it incredible, the water? Go dripping down those rocks. Just carve out Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson, and Roosevelt. Incredible accident.
But Cliff?
That doesn't back up my experience in life. Yes, sir.
Did Judas Iscariot go to hell for betraying Jesus?
Great question.
Our eyes are just crazy, and our nervous system, how we receive sight is insane. Like, how in the world could this happen on its own? Now let's see if Judas went to hell or not.
Question. Did Judas Iscariot go to hell because he betrayed Jesus? No.
But why not? He had no choice. And it was already predestined what was going to happen. God already knew that he was going to betray Jesus when Jesus came to earth.
Okay. And yet I would argue that Judas Iscariot did not have to betray Jesus. We read that the devil prompted Judas Iscariot. In other words, the devil did not propel Judas Iscariot. The devil prompted him. In other words, Judas Iscariot was tempted to betray Christ. He didn't have to. He chose to. Now, you're right. God knew he would do it. Well, God knows what I'm going to do as well. Not because God has programmed me a certain way, but because God's perspective is outside of time. God sees all of history at one glance, is my understanding. Therefore, God sees what I will freely choose to do tomorrow, and God saw that Judas Iscariot would betray Christ. Now, Judas and Peter are a fascinating contrast. Judas Iscariot betrayed Christ for 30 pieces of silver. Peter denied knowing Christ 3 times. Both were overcome with a sense of guilt. The difference is Judas Iscariot turned to despair, went out and hanged himself. He took the 30 pieces of silver, he threw them back at the feet of Christ, and he went out and hanged himself. Peter, on the other hand, after denying Christ, turned back to Christ for forgiveness.
Yeah, Peter went back to Jesus, falling short. Judas threw the coins at the feet of the priest, I believe, not Jesus. It is the same concept. Matthew 27 verse 3 says, when Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus has been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So he took the 30 pieces of silver, went back to the leading priest and the elder. So guys, go to God today. Know that he loves you. And just know, when you've fallen short and you technically spit in God's face, you can still go to him. He loves you. He will accept you with open arms. So I encourage you to do that today. Admit that you're a sinner. Believe that he died on the cross and rose again in 3 days so that you can be saved. Make him your Lord and Savior over your life. Guys, in the description below, you can decide to follow Jesus. It will help you walk through on how to do that. So I encourage you to do that today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like this video and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So thank you for all your love and support. It means the world to me. Hey guys, you might also like this video here.